Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Genaro Hernandez wash processed Honduras from Blind Tiger Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Blind Tiger, based out of Old Town, Maine. And this coffee is our January 2024 Coffee of the Month, as is voted on by you guys as the coffee you most want to see us review. And the main reason this coffee was featured in that Coffee of the Month poll is because I made it a priority to review some of our less utilized origins this year, as we don't often review too many Honduran coffees throughout the year. So this one was one of the catalysts for that poll, as I've generally had some pretty positive experiences with this coffee roaster. So we will see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 36. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 93 degrees Celsius, about 199 degrees Fahrenheit. And I liked this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. So anybody that does have familiarity with this coffee roaster knows that they roast on what I would describe as being that late 2010s American coffee sort of profile, which is kind of in line with that more medium light, but this one right here I feel like is one of the slightly more developed ones I have had from this coffee roaster. So I would say on the more developed side of that medium light in terms of this roast profile. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 10, first impression, and the cup had a very nice level of sweetness as we brewed it through the V60, and it initially came out a slight bit tart and citric, with it being balanced out by that strong contrasting sweetness to it. The listed Werther's Original definitely felt apt, as there was a strong brown candied sweetness to it, mostly clean but never so slight smoky quality, so a good start. Definitely more to come from this one, as on day 13 we ran it through the Chemex and it was offering a slight bit more of a nutty profile to it on this day. A little bit more of the robust Honduran qualities can be felt, as there's a slight bit of that brown candied aspect yet again, with some of those kind of contrasting citric qualities, so not quite as good on this second try through the Chemex. We continue on to day 17 as we opted for the April brewer. And there was, interestingly, significant improvement to the cup, as there was much more of that listed plum pie note that they do have on here, with a dark berry note that was initially reminiscent of what I would describe as being black cherry. In addition to that, the cup as a whole is better balanced, with the darker fruits being the more dominant attribute, complemented by what I would describe as a slight mint and citric quality. So the April brewer impression we had of this coffee was, I would say, a little different from some of the other cups and experiences we had on this one. So we continue on to day 21 as we ran it back through the V60 with some lower temperatures, and this was by far the best the coffee had been by a distance to this point, as there was notably less of the smoky and robust qualities with much more of a candied emphasis. So that brown candy note, that Werther's Original, was definitely a much more prominent and pronounced characteristic in this one, as I feel like kind of reducing those qualities, which at times could have taken over the cup ever so slightly, really allowed some of the other characteristics on this one to shine, as the brightness is better balanced with more of the dark fruits and just better definition in general, with that slight citric tone present yet again in the finish. Day 24 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it felt like it's the best it's been up to this point. So there's also some merit for this coffee just improving with a little bit more time, as there's better focus on the brown candied aspects with the lingering citric finish to it, less of the darker fruits, but in general pretty solid overall. Day 27, back through the V60 with lower temperatures, and there's more positive results to the cup again, as it does still offer a slight bit of the smoky qualities, but it's more than made up for by what is a very strong candied sweetness to this one, as the sweetness really did appeal to me, especially in this cup. As one of the main reasons I often don't review too many Honduran coffees is because they do lack that level of sweetness that I typically enjoy in my coffees. Dark fruit aspects are still present, as there's plenty of that listed plum. That slight black cherry also felt, but for the most part just solid all around. Day 30 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the cup was the best that had been up to this point. And I would say it's maybe dropping off ever so slightly at this point, but this day 30 mark was really nice, as it had plenty of the lovely caramel and brown candied sweet attributes yet again, with more of a dark fruit aspect also present, and the citric qualities being also, I would say, maybe a little bit more subtle, that kind of background in the finish characteristic within this one. But I would say it's been a pretty straightforward cup, especially at this time, as a lot of the notes in this one are just kind of very direct. You don't necessarily have to look for or search for any of these too hard. And day 33, final notes we have through the Chemex one more time with lower temperatures, and it did continue to exceed expectations as it offers some pretty nice clarity with a sweeter caramel forward cup. Citric qualities continue to remain present in what I would describe as a mostly clean cup. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. We have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. So I think the main thing I wanted to discuss in terms of the cleanliness is that there is that kind of slight smokiness to it, and you can see it there at that level 2 on this tasting wheel. And I would say that some of the earlier days, especially when we were brewing it at some higher temperatures, really did seem to kind of pull a little bit more of that out within this coffee. And kind of toning that down was one of my biggest objectives, as it had enough sweetness to begin with. I wasn't worried about maybe losing out on that or even necessarily losing out on some of the other characteristics of it. I just really wanted to tone down that aspect specifically. Also, I feel like if you were being really strict or really harsh on this one, especially on the earlier days with some higher temperatures, you could probably say level 3, maybe lower side of that level 4. But I would say that by the end, that smokiness shouldn't necessarily take away from all of the other wonderful things in this coffee, especially since they are pretty well defined. So a level 4 works really well for me in that. Finish, level 4. Yeah, this coffee is kind of the epitome of that. Leave it at a level 4. It doesn't last too long. You do get a slight bit of that kind of aftertaste to it, which can be in a couple of directions. For me, mostly it's that kind of brown candy attributes to it. I still experience that ever so slight herbality to it, which I described once as being that minty quality, but it's also still ever so slightly there after it follows all of those more, we'll say, sweet characteristics, as the sweetness is at a level 4. And this one's a true level 4, maybe slightly higher side of level 4. I don't traditionally experience a lot of Honduran coffees that have this much sweetness to them, but I think the main thing that Blind Tiger was going for in this coffee is the sweetness, given that that's the first note that they have for it, and it is a pretty sweet coffee, especially by Honduran standards. Citrus, level 4. So that is another thing that was pretty, I would say, at times pronounced within this coffee. It's something that I kept coming back to and something that I kept mentioning throughout, as I feel like when I was searching for it, when I was making this tasting, I said, okay, I'm maybe overlooking some of the more, we'll say, darker fruit characteristics, those plums, those black cherries, in place of that citric quality, and they do have a citric note on here as well. But other than that, I would say that I often found it to be the third most prominent and pronounced characteristic in this coffee, as the other two we're going to discuss right now. Beginning with the stone fruit at that level 4, and that's definitely that plum, as they have that plum pie characteristic to it. And I could see that in a number of traits, including some slight maybe brown sugar aspects to that. But most specifically, I would say it just has that darker fruit profile to it. And it's kind of in that intermediary range, somewhere between right after you've taken that first sip and after the finish to it. You get plenty of those, we'll say, darker fruit characteristics to it most distinctly, and at times very pronounced in that plum-like sense. And then the thing that was most pronounced for me is that caramel at the level 4, where there's original on point. I don't know if I could go as far to define it specifically as that, as I don't know if there's enough definition to say it's specifically this brown candy, but I would say that there's enough of that caramel, that brown candy sweetness in general to justify at least that level 4 mark, though I think that's a perfect spot for that as well, as it shouldn't go any higher than that. And then we have a couple of level 3s. We will start with the body at a level 3. This one has some nice texture. Even when I brewed it with the Chemex, it still had some pretty nice texture in general, which goes to show that that's one of the more appealing traits to a lot of people for these coffees, is the more, we'll just say, heavier body to them, as at level 3, always going to be a little high for a Chemex coffee. Acidity, level 3. Yeah, this one's not necessarily going to be the brightest coffee, and I don't think it was ever intended to be the brightest coffee. Just, I'll say a little bit more in that medium range, as I feel like there are many other Honduran coffees I've had that have much more brightness to them than this one did. Florality, level 3. Again, it's kind of that, I don't even think I necessarily mentioned too much, but it's got that kind of, we'll just say, soft florality to it. And it's a little bit hidden. It's a little bit, we'll just say, less defined or pronounced to the cup. But it was there enough for me to say, okay, as I'm making this tasting wheel, I'm getting enough of a floral sense that I think just kind of comes from this coffee in general to put it at that level 3 mark. Berry fruit, level 3. And I've been mentioning that dark cherry, as I could not help but notice some of those attributes complementing that plum-like characteristic to this one, as it just does have a nice dark fruit profile to it. And then last thing worth discussing is the chocolate at the level 3. So that's a little bit more of a traditional characteristic you should expect from a Central American coffee like a Honduran coffee. And even then, I would say that it's kind of that floral soft chocolate. I don't know what people describe it as, baker's chocolate or something like that I was experiencing from this, a little bit more in line with like a milk chocolate sort of thing. But those two things, the florality and the chocolate, they kind of go together in that regard, as it was, once again, a little bit more of that subtle characteristic to it, but present enough that you said, okay, it's giving this coffee at least a little bit more depth than just the notes that they have listed on here. But as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I think I like this one a little bit more than I might have expected after the first couple of cups, because if I'm being completely honest, the first couple of cups weren't necessarily my favorite. And I was a little worried this is going to be one of those coffees that became the coffee of the month that wasn't going to be an overly impressive coffee. But those slight adjustments I made really did seem to do wonders for this one, as it really helped tone down the less desirable aspects, specifically those smoky qualities, and allowed it to be the very sweet cup that it ended up being, with some really nice additional characteristics to it. So I would say it was pretty enjoyable. I don't think it's going to be an overly big standout for me throughout this year. I could say that it has a strong chance of being one of my favorite Honduran coffees, but even then, I think that's a little bit of a stretch. I just think I enjoyed this one mostly for the sweet profiles that it did offer, and outside of that, just some pretty nice depth in general. So once again, nice job to Blind Tigers. They continue to offer coffees that seem to do a lot better than I expect them to do, even with the previous experiences I've had with them. So that's a testament to them in general. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I feel like if you really do seem to prioritize and emphasize that kind of caramel brown candy sweetness in your coffee, that's the first place I want to direct you towards in this one, because that was by far the most pronounced characteristic for me. Outside of that, it is offering some additional things, those dark fruit characteristics, and still plenty of body. So it's offering you plenty of the classic Central American profiles that you could expect, with maybe a little bit more sweetness. So those are all positive enough traits for me. And if that's some type of coffee that you're looking for, I feel like this one would be a very nice fit. That's also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Genaro Hernandez wash processed Honduras from Blind Tiger Coffee. Thank you for watching.